Monday morning, I think that this must be the really interested group in email, right? I hope that's true. So as I indicated, or as John indicated, my name is Jim Moran. I'm from Merit Network. The IT staff and the network staff here is, of course, intimately familiar with Merit, and they participate in many of our activities. But some of you may not be quite so familiar. My role at Merit is that I am the services manager at Merit Network. And email is one of the things that's in my purview, and basically I'm responsible for outreach and development with our member community for email and collaboration as well as unified communications. So Merit, let's see, what do we have on this slide? So we're owned by 12 of the 13 state universities, including Ferris, of course. I like to say we're the oldest internet company in the world. But I think the key element, because we were started in 1966. But the key element is that we're governed by the state university members. So Ferris is not only one of our members and governors, but we also provide internet service as well as other services, including things like email. Go back to my agenda here. We'll do a little bit of the overview of the things that Zimbra/Merit Mail offers. And then I'll do a demonstration in detail, and then we'll get to the Q&A. And when we get to the Q&A, it would be really interesting to know what user community or what user group you're with. So, if you're with an administrative unit, what do you do? What kind of issues with mail are important in your workflow? And then we'll do the Q&A at the end. All right. So Merit Mail, it's a hosted, managed email collaboration server based on Zimbra. Zimbra is, I hesitate to call it the state-of-the-art, but it's one of the state-of-the-art email platforms. It was written about 7 years ago, originally as open source, and then, as with so many open source applications, it was then taken up by a commercial developer who developed it with commercial support and licensing. That is the version that we use. It's a licensed, fully licensed, supported product. They've got a huge footprint in the education market. I'll show you a slide a little bit later. The number of universities and so forth that are using the Zimbra collaboration suite are quite numerous. Recently, Zimbra was purchased by VMware, which is a huge giant in software, as you know. And of course, we're concerned, as you always are, when that kind of transaction takes place. But what we found out is we got sort of the best of in terms of the merger. We got the giant of VMware to really develop the product a little further and to bring the interface up to par. I keep looking back. So it features shared groups of calendars, address books, tasks, briefcase, and the interface is AJAX-based, which means it's optimized for web browsers on any platform. If you think of the ultimate AJAX-based application, it's Google Maps. The ability on Google Maps to put your thumb down or put your pointer down and move things around and zoom easily in and out is an AJAX-based technology. And it enables drag and drop and a lot of graphic functionality, which you'll see as we go through the interface here. Mobile support, it supports the iPhone, Android devices, Windows phones, and anything that will support an open protocol called ActiveSync. So ActiveSync is actually, not an open protocol, it's a public protocol owned by Windows, and it's licensed by Zimbra and iPhone and almost everybody else. And it provides a seamless way to synchronize mail and calendaring with one account. And we'll go into that in a little bit as well. In terms of spam and virus protection, we're using the state-of-the-art, which is Cisco IronPort. Cisco IronPort provides not only the hardware and the software that runs the spam filtering within our data center, but they also provide the list, the up-to-the-date managed list of who's a spammer and who's not, and so forth. Our experience with moving to Merit Mail ourselves, going on 4 years ago now, was that I used to get some spam. We had a pretty good spam filter before that. Now I get none. And it's never wrong. I hate to say never, but the spam filtering offered by the Cisco thing is so transparent that you really, if you don't want to manage your own spam anymore, you don't have to. And you'll see that again as we go through the demo. One of the things that we highlight with regard to our email service is that we are a member-based, not-for-profit organization. We're located here in the state of Michigan. And with regard to data privacy and integrity, both for individuals as well as institutions, your data is governed by the laws of the state of Michigan. With many of the larger cloud services, there are some political or personal and policy-based things that happen when your mail goes up into the cloud in terms of privacy and integrity. And with Merit, we like to refer to ourselves not as an outsourcer of this cloud service, but as a near sourcer because of our relationship with the universities. So these are a handful of the largest organizations that have adopted our hosted Merit Mail service. You'll see some of them located here in the state of Michigan and some not here in the state of Michigan. Some of these are now on their 4th year. Kristen, we just signed a couple renewals for folks moving on their 4th year. So we've got not only a product out there that they've been using, but they're obviously satisfied enough with to renew their contracts. So before I move on to the actual demonstration itself, the folks at Ferris IT were kind enough to provide a pretty nice outline, and I want to make sure that we address all the things that were in the outline. So the first of them would be the data storage size per user. And in Merit Mail, we feature unlimited storage per user. So there are no quota messages, no anything comes back to you saying that you have too large an attachment or an oversized mailbox or too many folders or any of those other messages. The net effect of that is that at least at an individual level, people manage their email by keeping all of it. And you'll see a demonstration of that as I show you my box. Now, don't confuse that with an archiving service. An archiving service is a completely different thing that manages, your data storage. This is simply the fact that we don't ever cause you to delete email. And if you ask yourself, how does Merit get away with unlimited storage? Well, it's pretty easy. I mean, it's all the vendors. Once you have a certain volume of users, it kind of smooths over. Some people don't have a lot of storage and some people have much. Also, as you've seen from a consumer trend, the cost of storage is incredibly low. I bought a backup USB drive for my wife over the break for a 1 terabyte drive for $79, with a coupon at Staples. So the cost of storage is fairly low. So Merit manages the storage on behalf of all the users, and we also drive the cost down with our economies of scale there. So individual users get unlimited storage. At the same time, there is an acceptable use policy that is required of using Merit Mail. It's the same acceptable use policy that Ferris currently uses for accessing internet services and has done so since 1994 under the terms of the Merit membership. So there's really no new news here, but that prevents abusive use of the mailbox. So at one of our member institutions, and I won't say which, we put it out there and we told folks there was unlimited storage, and one very clever computer science student wrote himself a little script that continued to send himself a giant email attachment over and over and over again until his email box filled up. Our engineers saw an alarm on the disk at some point and were able to prevent anything bad from happening. But that was an example of inappropriate use. But beyond those sort of things, email storage is unlimited. And that also applies to our briefcase, which is the focus of our collaboration suite, and I'll get into that in a little bit. With regard to email attachment sizes, as well as attachment sizes in the briefcase, there are practical working limits of about 150 megabits. Now, we set those limits as high as 500 megabits, but to be honest, normally on a network connection, that becomes the issue, the network connection, not the size of the attachment, and it can be unreliable. So we recommend that the system that serves Ferris be set at 150 megabit limit on attachments, but that's by no means an absolute ceiling, and it's far above what most other systems you'll find have that. So email attachment sizes, again, you shouldn't get any nasty reminders that this attachment is too large or can't handle it or what have you. You're much more likely, in my experience with Merit Mail, to get an error from the receiving user's system who can't handle the size of attachment that you sent. So I sent something to some folks at AT&T the other day, AT&T, the Titan, and I got a message back from them that said their email support system didn't support attachments larger than 5 megabits. So, or megabytes rather. So usually that's the limit you'll see there with the email attachment sizes. We talked a little bit about mail retention, that is to say you have an unlimited mailbox. So with that unlimited mailbox, again, you can store as much mail as you want. But again, that's not the same as a formal archiving service. We do provide a little bit of something like that, which is that we keep backups of all of your mailboxes for 30 days. So we can go back in time 30 days. If you say, Jim, I deleted a message 8 days ago, and I really, really need that. It had an important attachment. Our engineers can go in, or your engineers assigned to manage the Merit Mail interface can go in and retrieve that message. If you call me on day 31, if that message is older than 31 days, we couldn't restore that to your mailbox. So again, it's not a formal archiving service, but it does address kind of that critical window when you might need something that was accidentally deleted. That can be self-managed, or it can be managed by the IT staff. And in Zimbra 8, and we'll talk a little bit about that later this afternoon with the technical group, one of the features is it becomes totally self-managed. The client, web, access, and mobile types. So let's talk about the interface that's designed with Zimbra. Zimbra was built, like most modern email applications, to be done with a web interface. I know that the organization here at Merit, or at Ferris rather, largely is using Lotus Notes, and Lotus Notes has a dedicated client. And in the case of the dedicated client world, oftentimes the web access was a poor cousin to the full interface that you got, with the dedicated client. In the last 5 or 6 years, that's been turned upside down in the email world. The web interfaces are where all the functionality is built in, because that provides them the ability to interface not only with applications on your machine, but web services on the internet. So the new web clients are probably the best ways to manage your email. So Merit offers a web client that works in all of the major browsers: Firefox, Internet Explorer, Safari if you're using a Mac, Chrome if you're a Google or Google Chromebooks person, and virtually any browser that supports HTTP and AJAX, and those are most of those today. There's also a mobile interface, and you'll see the different types as I get into that you can select from the web, or as I have here on my iPhone and my iPad that are sitting at the document camera right here, you can see those things. You can use the native clients that are part of the thing. So here I've logged into the web client, and I mentioned that there are other clients that are supported. The most notable is Outlook. So I've started a copy of the Outlook client here, logged into our Merit Mail system as well. And the Outlook client is designed to emulate its relationship with an Exchange server. So for all intents and purposes, if you have functionality that's required by Exchange, SharePoint functionality and so forth, that works through Outlook, you can then work through Zimbra as well, through Merit Mail, with the Outlook client. A little bit of a software development piece Zimbra had to do. They simply wrote a plug-in to Outlook that is installed with your Outlook install, and then it points at the Merit Mail server. But as far as Outlook is concerned, it's looking to an Exchange server. So it supports, again, SharePoint and the other Microsoft features, Microsoft Link and so forth. We talked a little bit about the spam and virus filtering, the iron port. But I know many of you manage your own filtering within your email system today, and I'll go over that as we do the demo as well. So with that, let's start the demo. So I've again logged into my Outlook, or to my Merit Mail account, and this is the default look for the web interface. But let me log out just so you see it from start to finish. So you can get this login, and I'm pointed to mail.merit.edu. If we did host email for Ferris, it would probably be something like mail.ferris.edu or mailbox or something easy to remember. You could log in again from any web interface. This could be your dedicated computer, it could be a laptop, you could be at a public library terminal. Obviously this isn't my computer that I'm working with here, and I simply fired up the Firefox browser that the staff installed and start up my session. So it remembers my name kindly, but does not remember my password. You've got to be careful of that, especially if you're at a public workstation. And you'll note down here there is the ability to select version. So the advanced is the default. That's the AJAX one that gets you all the drag and drop stuff and all sorts of cool things like that. The standard HTML is a little clunkier, but still gives you full access. So if you were at some place that had an older, slower computer and you needed to check your email, that would work fairly well. And if you're using your smartphone but you don't have your smartphone configured for email and just want to check it through the browser, this mobile interface presents the email in larger blocks that are easier to work with on a mobile thing. Normally it just senses what kind of operating system you have and how good your computer is, and if it's good enough, it logs you directly into the default. There we go, I log in. And remember, there's no time to download here, there's no waiting for messages to sync, any of that, because this is all in the cloud in the Merit Mail data centers back in the Southeast Michigan area. It's not really coming to the computer. That's a key difference between this interface here and the Outlook interface or any of the other clients that you use. Most often those clients go through a process where they have to download the entire message or at least a portion of the message before displaying it. So if you've worked with Outlook or Thunderbird or any IMAP or POP client, you know, there's that wheel that comes up or some message that says you're downloading. You never see that with the web interface because unless you request the message, it's always sitting up there on the in the cloud, rather, in the Merit cloud, the community cloud, the edu cloud. Because again, it's not the same as the public domain cloud. Merit is near sourcing this. So I purposely brought up my email box to demonstrate a few features. And I'm just going to kind of go left to right and down to up in this as I crawl through the interface and go through a couple key tasks. Well, let me give a brief overview. So you'll see on the left, I've set this up to have my folders displayed. My mail by default is delivered to my inbox, so all new messages are sent to my inbox. But I have a huge subset of folders, that some of which are historical. So like many people, I am storing things in email that you'll see in a while, maybe 13 years old in this account. But some of those things are also critical to my workflow. I pulled up something from 2003 just the other day that was a huge network diagram I had done for a project that got stalled, and it got started up again. And I went in, I grabbed that, and I thought, wow, I didn't know I worked that hard, you know, bringing that new thing in there. So I think that that's the default, that people are beginning to use email, rightly or wrongly, as sort of this workflow, you know, hub, and it's where you can store materials and have good access to them. So you'll see there are 48,035 messages in my inbox. And I didn't used to do that. Zimbra is what has actually spoiled me. One of the most interesting features of Zimbra and is the search feature. And the search feature is indexed on the machine as mail comes in. So as your mail is delivered into your inbox, Zimbra actually, the Zimbra servers, the Merit Mail servers, they actually index it just like they would a file on your computer. So they build an index for it, which means that when you want to search for it, it's instantaneous. So let me demonstrate. I have mail on my computer from, I'm going to use one of the members that I work with frequently, Detroit Public Library, probably dating to 2001, something like that. I've been working with them. And this is on the fly. I haven't done this yet here today. This isn't a save search or anything like that. I have 10 gigabytes of stored mail for my 13 or 14 years worth of email. And I'm going to execute a search on Detroit Public Library. So it's looking in subject, from, to, it's already done. So it turned out that I have probably close to 1,000, I would imagine, messages, maybe even more. I haven't even gotten out of 2012 yet. And I can keep going and going and going. And it'll just keep going down. It'll go all the way back to 2001. So within that instant, I was able to get everything out of my 10 gig email box that had the words Detroit Public Library in the subject, from line, to line, body. And I could even go further than that. I could say, look in the attachments too. It would take a little longer, but not much. And why is it so quick? Two things. One, as I mentioned, it's indexed the mail as it's come in and out. So it's already built that index. It already knows where everything is. It's built its own database. Two, rather than using the power of this computer that I'm working at here to search, I'm not. I'm using the big honking servers back in Merit's data centers. 6, 7, 8, 9 racks of giant big servers humming all the time. So I'm able to search not with just the power here on the local PC, but with the power of the cloud. So boom. Well, as a result of those two things, the quickness of the search, why do I put anything into folders anymore? I can find anything I want whenever I want. Now that's not true. I do have a modern set of folders here that are sort of project-based, that are things that I'm working on and that I need to keep track of. And as I take things out of my email box, so I'll take this message for here, for example, and I'll move it over to Detroit Public Library. So I do still have folders and I still do manage them, but a lot of things just get hung up in my email box. And like many of you, I think my workflow is that before I close my desk up at the end of the day, I have to have at least addressed, all of the email that I got today, right? That's sort of a generic workflow. But oftentimes I might have addressed those, but I haven't yet filed them, so I just leave them in the mailbox. And when I need that work, it's quite easy to find. And it gets even worse. So you can not only do a search, but you can refine that search and get incredible amounts of things. Let me go back there. I clicked a little too quick. It's one of the problems I've noticed when people give presentations like this. How many of you have seen it where they get a tendency to move the mouse around like this, almost like it's a nervous thing? No, I've seen it. So I'm trying to avoid that today. Let me know if I'm doing that. So I'm going to say all mail that I've gotten from, let's say, krcu@merit.edu. So that's all the mail that Kristen has sent me and that I've kept. So I'm going to go ahead and search on that. So not so many messages as it was the other one. I tend to clean up the messages from Kristen. But then I can say, send me everything, or show me everything that Kristen sent me with an attachment. So they're back in January, and then back in December 7th, she sent me a couple things that had attachments in them as well. I can say, well, not just that kind of attachment. I wanted to see ones that were in Adobe PDF. And it turns out some of the ones that she sent me were a PDF. And I could say, well, but I want to see, because I know this happened before, it happened sometime before Halloween. So I'm going to go and say that. So now it searched on all of those criteria and built that out. So I can refine, what's in the email box. And again, it's made me sloppy with building folders, but what it has allowed me to do is to build, and you'll see these down here in just a second, after I get through my multiplicity of folders. Just a second, there we go. You'll see that I have saved searches. So when I have a search, a particular search that I'm going to use over and over again, I can set it up as I've done up here with whatever criteria I want. Has an attachment, was sent before this, was sent after that, had this, had this specific phrase in the text. I can also ask it to search folders that are in my spam or trash folders, in case maybe it's a message that I accidentally deleted recently, and that's sitting out there. So I can add all these things up. And so for example, if Kristen and I were working on a project, let's say it was a project for Ferris, and I would say, okay, send me everything from Kristen that was a Microsoft project file that had Ferris in the content name, I could then save that. And then whenever I wanted to get in and look at that sort of folder, I just run that search. So in effect, the search becomes my folder for that kind of content. And it allows you to work that way in your workflow. And you couldn't do it if it weren't for the speed of the search, right? So if I go over here to Outlook, Outlook features many of those same things with two critical differences. One, if I did the search in Outlook, I would be using the power of this processor here. And I'm sure this is a very good desktop, the presenter's desktop here, but it doesn't compare to the processing power that's in the Merit data center, right? And two, it doesn't index the mail. So it's searching line by line, text after text, and it could grind away for hours, something it could do on the web interface. So I went a little overboard on searching there, and that's not something that you're always going to do, but it does rationalize for me why I've got so many messages in my inbox. And it allows you to work in a similar way if you like. So let's look at your basic task, which would be replying to an email. So let's just pick this one here. This is from my colleague Karen Michon at Merit. I'm going to double click it to open it. So we have a weekly meeting regarding design, hardware and software design type solutions. And so Karen sends out the message, and if we've got any pending agenda items, she'll put them on there. And if there are new ones, she asks for that. So that's what we're looking for here. So this is the solution design meeting. So I probably want to reply or reply all. In this case, Karen is asking for agenda items, and it's most appropriate for me to say reply. I don't need to reply to everybody in the group, maybe, that I have that, but I'm going to go ahead and do that anyway. So I say reply all, and you'll note that the two addresses that were there are put there by default. So the reply to address is Karen, she sent it, and then the other folks are CC'd. If I wanted to add others to the CC there, I could go look in my address book, and I could see other folks. I'm not going to do that, though. Let me get out of this for a second. So, or I could add people in. And here's an interesting feature, and this bears a lot of discussion. So there's this autocomplete feature that you see. Can everybody see that? That I only typed in a few words of the address, and it automatically went out and found the completed address. As a result, I don't remember anybody's email address anymore, because all I do is type in the first few characters and it remembers it for me and it goes on. It reminds me of pre-cell phone days when I had a database of 500 or 600 phone numbers in my head. You know, I work on the phone a lot, so I knew a lot of phone numbers. And as soon as cell phones came out, I don't even know my wife's number, right? If I'm in trouble and I'm not with my cell phone, it's going to be difficult to do. Likewise with the address book feature here, the autocomplete feature. And a couple other things about this. It's dragging this autocomplete out of 2 or 3 different sources. One is pretty straightforward. It would be the global address book. Most of our institutions, when they implement Merit Mail, they ask us to take their existing directory. So I guess for Ferris, that would be the current, is it e-directory service, is that correct? And it's moving to an active directory service, is that correct? Whatever. So it would be whatever your global address book is right now, we would import that into Merit Mail and you would see that. But more importantly, it keeps an address book, and I'll show you this in just a moment, called frequently emailed contacts or emailed contacts. So basically it creates an automatic entrance address book for people that you email frequently. Furthermore, it builds that in terms of the number of times you send to that address. So the more often you send to an address, the higher on top of the address book it comes, the more quickly it would autocomplete for you here. So many people are concerned, and we'll show you this in a few moments in Merit Mail, about how do you manage the address book. But just as though, just as in the same way that I don't manage my folders the same way that I used to, I don't manage an address book anymore. My emailed contacts manages my address book for me pretty much better than I can do it. But the good news is, again, once I've sent an email to somebody, it's in there and I can just select it and on we go. I might want to add an attachment. So let's say, for example, that as we're working through this, I don't even know if there's any documents on this machine I could send. There we go. So this document is now attached to the email that I'm responding to. And my email might say something like, you know, Karen, please see the attached, or please see the drawing, or whatever it would be as part of that email. So again, to add the attachment, I go to the top of the message. I can click into the browse. It's the same way that you attach in almost any application. Navigate through the folders, find the document I'm looking for, and then go from there. You'll note that in addition to adding from an attached folder, I can also add from my briefcase. We'll talk about the briefcase in a second session here. But within the briefcase, there are documents stored as well. So I could attach those to the email, and I could even attach contacts from the organization or email, actual emails themselves or email folders to have folks look at that as part of the email. Now typically, you're going to be attaching documents from your computer. But should you choose to use the briefcase, and there's lots of good reasons to do that, we'll see that in a few minutes, you can use those as well. Let's put it here. I'm going to get rid of this attachment. I decided I don't want to do that. One of the things when you're making attachments, and I've done this error a couple times, is that, I'm typing up something, let's say I'm sending John a proposal, so I type it up and I put it in a Word document and I send it off to John. And I don't send it yet, I attach it. And then there's one more thing I want to edit. So then I go ahead and I edit one more time, but I've already attached it. And the version that I attached is not the one that I just edited. So that's what this checkbox helps you to do here. You've already attached a message, you've gone ahead and edited it. So now you really don't want this version of it. You uncheck that, and then you go back and you can get, a better version of that. So I'm going to keep this one actually and get rid of this one. And I'm going to send it to my other account here. Get rid of this one. So it's like I'm replying to Karen's account. We're going to go ahead and send that. And over here, I've logged into another Merit Mail account, not my personal Jim Moran account, but an account we call demo@merit.edu, so that you could see how messages look as they go back and forth between users. So now I've sent this message to Jim, and I've got the message, and I can work with it in this pane down here, but more often I like to double click and have the message open in a separate pane. Whoops. Oh, this one isn't set up to do that, so I'll have to talk about that in a second. So here's the attachment that was sent to me. Now this computer is set up in the Microsoft Internet Explorer side of it, and probably in the operating system itself, to handle PDFs by stopping working. It's recovered. Huh. Let me get out of this. Close this message. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over here to my sent folder. So here's the message I just sent, which somehow wasn't working very well with Internet Explorer, but works better with Firefox. I figured out why. Yeah. Well, my preferred browser is Firefox, but this little issue here notwithstanding, I haven't seen any issues with Explorer. Zimbra and VMware are sure to keep up with the latest updates in Ajax. Likewise, the main browser folks are sure to keep up with the latest updates in Ajax. So I think that might be a permissions issue. But so anyway, so it displays this computer here is set up to display my PDF inside of the browser window. I go back here to my actual mail itself. If I right click, I can save this as. Now I'm actually going to save the file over to the desktop. Now it's on the desktop. I actually tell it to open it up. And this way it's going to open it up with Adobe Acrobat itself. There we go. So if you wanted to manipulate it within Acrobat, if you had Acrobat Pro or whatever, you would do that. And when we show this a little bit later, we'll look at some Word documents as well. But let's get back to the interface. So again, I jumped down here to get my sent messages. And I did that because something hung up in Explorer, of course. But that's a behavior I frequently do. I send a message. How many of you have sent a message where you say, attached, please find, and then, of course, you neglect to put the attachment on, right? So I do that more often than not. So then I'll say, oh, did I put the attachment on that one? And check back in here to my sent folder, and I can see what I've sent and to whom all day long and which attachment it had and so forth. So that's one of the uses of having your sent folder here. So we showed replying to an existing email, but let's start a new one here and walk through a couple steps with that. So again, a completely new email address. If I wanted to work with the address book, I could click on the 2 here, and I could go and I could search for addresses. So I'm going to go ahead and search for our friend Demo. So I'm searching on anybody's name that would contain the word Demo. I can search in a variety of places. The global address list which is what Merit publishes. It's got all of our information in it that comes from our directory service. I could put it in personal and shared contacts, which is a separate set of contacts which are here on Zimbra, Merit Mail, or I could put it in contacts, which is the global view of all of those things. So typically I find it's better if I search in the global address book, and you can see that I've found 3 users, and this is the one that I'm using here. Click on 2, and then I'll say OK. Add a CC here, and I'm not sure who I want to put on this one, so I'm going to say, I know his name is Todd. So do we have a Todd? There he is. Todd. Which Todd do I want? It's Todd Keebler. So then I can make sure I see Todd. So those are the things that are happening, again, within the global address book, or I could set it up to search my personal contacts or even my frequently emailed contacts and get those things from there. But so often, again, I am simply finding people through the autocomplete. So I don't exactly remember my wife's email address, but I know that it has McCann in it someplace because that's her last name. So I simply searched on that in the demo. I've got a daughter named Lara. There she is. So forth. So again, you can manage the address book. When you have this autocomplete function here, it makes you a little sloppy about trying to keep those contacts because it manages it for you. Now you'll see in just a moment, you can explicitly manage your emailed contacts too. So it's not just this thing that's automatically happening. I'm going to go ahead and close that one. So getting back to the message that I had here, so this was the message from Karen with regard to the solution design meeting. And that's a meeting I may want to attend. I happen to be booked for it already, but let's say that I wasn't. I could take that message just like that and drag it down here. And now I've created an appointment based on that email message. So somebody in the email message says, Jim, would you like to come to this meeting? There's something important, blah, blah, blah. I can just drag out of that thing and over to the calendar and put that message in effect. Cancel that one there. I can also, if there were attachments here, and let's go back to my sent folder for that. You'll notice that for the attachment, I could elect to download it, or I could put it in the briefcase. And again, we'll talk about the briefcase a little later. But within the message now, I could move that attachment into one of the folders that I maintain here in the cloud. The briefcase is a set of storage folders that exist along with your email folders on the Merit Mail servers. And they too have the unlimited storage functionality. So that was opening a message, replying to it, doing an attachment, and as well as opening an attachment at the other side. So one of the questions that was on the agenda was the ability to send system-wide messages. And the answer to that question is pretty simply, it depends on if everybody in the system wants to receive a message. So we can easily create an email address entry like all@ferris.edu or staff@ferris.edu. And we can also lock that down so that only people within your domain could send mail to that, so that you wouldn't have people from the outside world sending messages to all@ferris.edu. But beyond that, we don't have any control. It's all or nothing. So whoever's on that list, if it's everybody on campus, they have to be ready to receive that message. Now there's some added functionality that we can put in there, which is part of the list manager service. But that actually isn't included here with the basic Merit service. Many organizations will actually run the list managed service themselves as an on-campus application, and we integrate it with Merit Mail. But one way or the other, we can manage those things. More importantly, any existing groups that are in the campus organizational directory, IT directory, those groups can be created as mail groups. So any relationships that you might have currently where there's a group of people in a department, you know, and they all have like admissions at Ferris, or maybe it's the English department and they have English faculty at Ferris, or whatever those addresses are. Those existing groups are very easy to just, you know, replicate here and see those in the existing, or rather in the global address book. One of the things that I, as a user, am not a huge user of, but I know many folks are, is what we refer to as the tagging system. So these are ways to rate messages. So I've created some tags that you see here, and basically they're statuses, right, from, you know, red hot, on fire, needs to be addressed right away, to cold. You know, really don't have to worry about that. So I can take any message and I can mark it either as part of the reply that I do to it. So when I see that reply come back, or somebody sees my reply, they see my tag. Now they may not know what my tag means, but they at least see my tag that said this is a priority, or it's on fire, or what have you. Or I could take any existing message in my mailbox, right click on it with this context sensitive thing, and I can add a tag to it from my tags. And the tags that I have here, again, are the ones that I've created. Users are free to create their own. If the organization, if Ferris wants to agree on a university-wide tag naming schema, you know, priority, urgent, and so forth, those can be placed there as well. Maybe because I don't have enough priority tags is why my email box has 43,000 emails in it. But the tagging feature, I think people do, again, depending on your user orientation, people find that useful. And I think that's really kind of the key word about Merit Mail, or almost any of the cloud-based email solutions that you see, is that they really offer the end user computer much more variety than previous systems did. So there's a lot of customization here that you can do in addition to your tags. I'm using the default Merit Mail color scheme here, but that's largely has to do with the fact that I'm fundamentally colorblind and wouldn't notice the difference too much if I changed it. Whereas many organizations, you know, or many users, you know, are really sensitive to what that user interface looks like every day, and they want to put in the colors there that they find easy to work with. So those options are available as well. One of our member organizations, and again, I won't disclose which, made it a point of putting the school colors as part of the web interface. And worse yet, they told us to make those colors there and don't let the end users change them to their own colors, which would have been okay, except that the colors for this organization weren't particularly pleasant. And people eventually had a rebellion and they kind of backed off on that. Because again, it's about what makes the interface usable for you. I know that for years I spent a lot of time teaching reading, and I found out that yellow dog, you know, yellow legal paper is the easiest on the eyes, and it's a fatigue thing over time. And so, you know, with those kind of interfaces, you can do that. Although you can see I don't use yellow, even though that's supposed to be easier. So we've replied to messages, we've done categorizations. Let's look at the address book then. So in the address book, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a couple different things going on. So we've got the contacts, which is this aggregate pretty much of everything within the global address book. We've got your emailed contacts, which is automatically built, and which I don't particularly, you know, don't manage in a real one. Got a couple example address books here. This one I'm not using right now, but you can import an address book or create a new one. I guess the import isn't, no, the import's done someplace else, so I'll show you that. But when you import an address book in, you have to designate a folder where it goes. So I'll show you that a little bit later. Personal address book here, which in my case is empty. Suggested contacts, this came from another user who said these are good contacts for you to have. There's trash, and then there's another sample address book that I have down here. So for the contacts, again, what we've done at Merit is we've taken our directory service, our campus directory service, which has all of our employees and interns and everybody else into it, and we've imported it in. So from day one, I have the ability to see anybody within my Merit global address book. Now I've chosen it so that as I add users, so if I go ahead and do a new user, by default, that new user gets created in my global address book, not locally on my account, but in my global address book. And that allows other users at Merit to see the contacts that I've put in as well. I'll give you an example of that. This is one of my vendors here. I picked her address up as a frequently emailed contact the first time she and I had some thing. I added her phone number to it by editing the entry. So I also happen to know her phone number. So I'm working just with her email address that I got out of my frequently emailed contacts. I put in her name and first and last name as well as her phone number. And I could add other things as well into that. And now once I've done that, I can share this contact, or rather forward this contact to somebody else at Merit. And they can get the same thing out of the database as well. It goes into their address book. You can search contacts the same way that you can search mail and so forth. It's searching the same set of folders basically. And again, you can refine that. So I want to see, things that happen with Becky in it and so forth. All right. So once you have the address book in, again, it appears as an option in all of your to and from folders. Now, one of the hard parts that we deal with is, how do we take that initial set of things into the address book? So we work with your team to make sure that all of those fields that you find are critical in your current address books are brought over into here. And that includes fields that maybe Lotus Notes has that aren't common here. We can go ahead and add in custom fields. So your contacts should be able to be imported, again, from the existing systems transparently to you. But there is a way to import contacts from another thing, and I'll make sure to cover that in just a moment. Move to calendaring. So with the calendar, I choose the basic view that I have here of showing the whole week. I could show just the day, and sometimes I do. If I've got a really busy day and I want to kind of look at the calendar in a granular way, I'll change to that view. You can do the work week, and that's a little less scrunched up here on the screen. But I often have things that happen on the weekend, and if I didn't put them in Merit Mail or in my calendar, I would forget. One of the interesting things I find about working with Merit Mail Collaboration Suite, since we've implemented it at Merit, is how dependent I became on it, how quickly. So, for example, the calendaring is something that with my schedule, I'm in and out of the office. I work with many organizations. I work with many different business units at Merit. Without the calendar, it would take me half again as much time just to coordinate all those meetings. So with the calendar, my end user, or rather my user community or my community at Merit can see when I'm busy, what I'm doing if I elect to do it, and I'll show you that in just a second. And so forth. And people say, Jim, do you want to go to that meeting next Wednesday? And I say, look at the calendar. Because I don't know. I don't know if it's not in the calendar. Jokingly, my wife says that if my calendar said, drive off the cliff, I would. 3:30 p.m., get in the car and drive off the cliff, I would. But the calendar really does kind of, is part of my workflow that way. I couldn't work without it. And I remember before we had Merit Mail how difficult it was. You had to get an admin staff to say, send an email to these 12 people, try to figure out when they're around, get them back, and so forth and so on. And having the organizational calendar that's so easy to use like this has really been a game changer. So again, I'm viewing the week because I use it for all of my activities. I'm going to go ahead and create a new calendar appointment. Now, when I'm in the calendar and I click on new, obviously it assumes that I want to do a calendar appointment. But you'll notice that from any of the windows, whether you're in Mail, whether you're in Address Book or Calendar or Tasks and Documents, you can create a new one of those from within there. But when you're in the calendar interface itself, it makes the assumption that you're creating a calendar appointment. So we'll say test here, and I am going to invite Kristen to this. And I know your email address, Kristen, only because it's so darn cool. I like that one. And Kristen and I have a room that we probably want to meet in. So at Merit, we've taken all of the things that are locations to meet. We've grouped them as locations. Let me back up here a second. And you'll see there's a location tab as part of the calendar invite. So I click on that, and I have to quick search quickly to display all of the resources that Merit has currently available. And you'll notice here in this column it says what's free and what's busy. So the Dunes conference room is busy, but Lighthouse is not. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And now, of course, it's taken the Lighthouse conference room, it's booked it for the same time that we have the meeting. It's marked it as busy on everybody else's calendar. It could be the case that for some conference rooms, maybe one of the admin staff is in charge of that conference room and you don't book it without asking her. There are a couple like that at Merit. And in that case, when you ask for it here, it says tentative, and then she sends back an approval later on. In this case, our conference rooms, for the most part, are set out to auto-reply to say we're accepted. If nobody else is in there, you can have that. So I might want, at the same time, to bring in somebody remotely, and they need to drive one of our vans. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to add that van. So now for that meeting, we've reserved both the conference room and a van. And we used to have things like projectors and so forth in this list as well, but we're kind of small at Merit, and we were able to put projectors in all of our conference rooms. So we don't reserve projectors or portable computers or things anymore, but many organizations still have that functionality. The largest implementation of these locations is done for us in Detroit Public Schools, which is one of the implementations I did, where every single classroom in every building, including things like janitor's closets and so forth, is listed as a resource in their location calendar. But we can put all sorts of equipment, cameras and so forth. I don't know what other kind of supplies folks might want, but they can be created as resources. And again, those resources can be auto-accepted, or you can designate some person who's responsible for that area or for those instruments or for those tools or whatever they have to be the moderator of those. So I'm going to go ahead and get this van out of here. That would confuse people. I'm going to go ahead and send that. So now I've invited Kristen to that. Go back to my mail, and the first thing I'll have, I got to get out of search mode here, I get the auto accept from the Lighthouse conference room. If this had been a managed resource and one of the admin staff had to acknowledge that, I would get a message that said, this has been sent to this person, you're waiting on their approval. Don't count on having this room until they send back. And then when she sends back with the accept, then it automatically marks the room as busy for me as well. So that whole process goes on in the background. If Kristen were to open up her phone and get her email, she could answer. It's all right. Okay. How come I'm sorry. Yes. No, that's not from you. Well, let's see. Maybe you're not sending me messages to auto accept. Well, I haven't seen a response from you yet, Kristen, because Lighthouse has accepted. That's what the checkbox here tells me. But this says you haven't yet accepted. Now, you'll notice that when I posed the meeting, it showed here with this dark blue that Kristen is busy, and she's busy, of course, at the FSU mail demo. So it's not a surprise. I can also see my own free busy that I'm looking at out here, but she hasn't answered yet. If this were a third party, I'm going to go ahead and add a third party in here. This is my Yahoo account. You'll notice that for this third party, I don't see any availability, because this third party is not on the Merit Mail system. So I don't have a visibility into their calendar. If I wanted to move this up a day, I can look and I say, oh, Kristen's busy at 9, so am I, but we've got 9:30, we've got 12:30. My God, look at all those meetings that day. 12:30, we've got, what is this, 1:30. So I can look and I can say, well, Kristen's got, or that's me rather, I've got the CCI meeting that I do weekly. Kristen has the Merit Next Step program and so forth. So her various appointments. Now, very often, of course, you don't want people to see what your appointments are. Particularly the case for things like personal appointments, medical appointments, and so forth, that you need to put on your work calendar because you're not going to be available for that sessions, but you don't want people to know, for example, that you're going for some gruesome medical test or whatever. But you need to put those details in there. So you can take an invitation. Well, first of all, you can mark the status here. Sorry. I got to get rid of Kristen to get that. Sorry. I think I'll start a new appointment for that. Let me create a new appointment. Hang on. So here I can mark the appointment private. So I can put all the details in there as to attendees and time and location and any other information. And if I don't want people to see that, then I can mark it as private. All things by default go onto your main calendar. So the main calendar is this aggregate, that has all of your appointments in it. I've created a number of sub-calendars here, and I could put it on that one. So let me remove my private here for a moment. So I put that on calendar test 3. Well, test 3 is my calendar here. And I can look at it. And I can add a share to it. So right now, all internal users can see that calendar. Or no internal users can see that calendar. I only want Kristen to see it. And all I want to do is have her have viewing privileges, not everybody, or not manager or admin privileges. So now I've gone in there. Okay. So without having marked that thing as private, I've created an activity that's in a calendar that I'm only allowing one user at Merit to see, Kristen. I've had to create it as a sub-calendar of my main calendar. By default, myself, as well as many people at Merit, share their calendar with everybody. Now, some folks that you might imagine, like our CEO, doesn't have the same kind of sharing, I think, that that the ordinary user does. But I think by and large, and I can look in just a moment, 98% of our population may well share their calendars with each other, just completely and unequivocally. But many people will have a separate private calendar within there where they create these activities like pick your kids up from school and go to the doctor and all those sort of things. Or maybe there's a confidential matter that's happening here at Ferris and you only want to have you and a select number of employees involved in that. So that calendar then you can create and limit only to those folks. The key to it though, when you do that, is that remembering every time you create an appointment that you have to select a calendar other than your generic calendar. So if you want to create a more limited set of folks that can see a particular calendar invite or a particular calendar, you have to explicitly say that. Otherwise, this item will appear in your general calendar and it'll go from there. Let's talk about sharing calendars. Back over here for a minute. So you'll see up here I've got displayed my main calendar, which is called just calendar. A couple of calendars I've created for things that we've been working on. So a group of us went to EDUCAUSE 2011 and presented, and we needed to coordinate events there. So I created a one-time calendar, if you will, just for that. It was kind of interesting at the meeting, EDUCAUSE is such a techie meeting. I was able to get from them an ICS file that had all of the events at EDUCAUSE. So not only did I create the calendar that had everybody in it, or that had all these folks in it, but I was actually able to add items to it from an external source so that we could all see, for example, when the opening reception was, and so forth and so on within that. 2 minutes? Okay, I think we're doing pretty well on that. Let me check the outline and make sure that we've gotten what we're supposed to get. So we talked about share calendars. We designated entries as private. My EDUCAUSE calendar here is a good example of a group calendar that has many items in it. If an entity had sent me a calendar invite, excuse me, I'm sorry. Oh, there you go. So Kristen responded to my calendar invite. There it is, so we know that she's coming. You have the ability to propose a new time. So Kristen might have responded and said, you know, gee, Jim, I'm really busy for that time, even though my calendar doesn't say so. You know, can we try this another time? I could say, sure. And then with the new time, it simply reopens the calendar invite again, and I can game when the best time would be. Now, this is Kristen's invite, so all I can do here is suggest a time, not actually book it. But then she would receive the message in return and go from there. Auto reply and so forth, I think we want to cover in the separate set of sessions, maybe in the next. Can we do that, John?
Yes, we can be flexible in the schedule. What we need to do now is take some questions and answers, and Krista, you know, please raise your hand at the other end, and we'll make sure the group down there gets an opportunity to ask questions from that end. So there's some flexibility in the schedule. You can do some more calendaring things if you want on the second half, but after the Q&A, I think everybody's going to need to
I think this is a nice place to break.
Stretch their legs, and then we'll come back. So
Me too.
I think we'll open it up to the larger audience first. Please press
for return receipts. There's a little variety in how that might be integrated as we've integrated at other organizations. Some folks don't like that idea of somebody knowing that they read it. And so some departments have chosen not to accept return receipts, and some have. It can be a global thing. It's usually best as a global variable. So that's really a policy decision, but we certainly can do that. It's important to note that return receipts from outside domains are unreliable. So, but yeah, that's an important question.
Yeah, I'm basically kind of a hack of a user, but I'm guessing as society's become very connected, I've got iPads, iPhones, I share accounts with my wife, my family, LinkedIn, Facebook. How is your interface contacts list? I hate it. I sometimes wind up with 3 or 4 duplicates of contacts, and our current system, I have to have 2 different calendars, 2 different emails, because Gmail doesn't talk to what we have. So can I just have one email account and one contact account and one calendar so everybody can share it in my life and I don't have to do all the duplicates?
I probably aren't prepared. I'm not prepared to answer the global things with the other pieces of software there, but I can address a couple of specifics there. Let me go to the mail interface. So I had all of these folders here, but I could add a new folder, you know, anytime I wanted. And then that new folder has properties. So I'm just going to call this 1. I've created it down here. It opened it up for me. Where did it put it? There it is. I'm sorry. I don't want to add a folder. I want to. I'm not in the right place here. What I'm trying to show you how to do is to add an external email server. So you can add as one of these folders an external email server. And for that I have to go over to preferences. Maybe it's a little too convoluted here to do. Let's see.
The issue is basically what you're showing me is like
Calendar is much more difficult to deal with, agreed. So there is a way, as you were pointing out, and I have to go to these Zimlets to do it, where we can set up an external email account. So for example, I have a Yahoo account. So long as I'm paying for the paid version of that account that supports IMAP or POP3, and that's what you have to do with Yahoo. I don't know what the story is with Google. Most of the cloud-based email systems, they want you to use their web interface. There's an upcharge for using IMAP or POP. So that's true of Yahoo. But if I did pay for the free version, or rather for the paid version, and I did have POP email access, I could set it up here as a folder, and that folder then would simply query that server every time I opened up the web interface here, and I would see all the email for that service delivered into a folder in Merit Mail. Calendar's difficult. When we import Merit Mail, getting mail and tasks and address books and contacts is fairly straightforward. Calendar is a one-off every time we do it, and it has a lot to do with the fact that there are many, many calendaring systems out there, different kinds. Our calendaring system supports ICS. In ICS, let me get rid of that, no. If I wanted to start a new calendar here we go, I could point it to an external server, just as I can point the folder to an external IMAP or POP3 mailbox and have it come into a folder. I can point the Merit Mail service to an external folder so long as it is ICS compatible. Now, most calendars are, to some extent, ICS compatible, but they sometimes disagree on the fields that are in them. So the answer is yes, you can see these external calendars if the organization supports ICS, but it is not straightforward. The email is very straightforward.
Questions? Okay. Push the button. Yes, push the button.
I have a question about on the calendaring, or an address book, I should say. I didn't notice where you could put in your own private groups and only send it to the 20 people that you invite every month to the same meeting, where I don't necessarily want to share that with the whole university.
So you want to create a...
Hey, Jim, rather than try to demonstrate it, let's just try to answer the questions because it'll take up too much time. And we're
Sure.
going to have some more questions.
So your question again, please?
If I want to create a group in my address book that only I can see and invite them to a meeting or send them emails, where I do it all the time, but I don't want it to go out to the whole
I see.
university address book.
Yeah, and that's a factor. Once you've created it in your address book, you do a share. And I'm going to show a basic share here only because we didn't do it. And let's do this one here. So when you create a share, and it doesn't matter whether you're sharing a calendar, an email box, an appointment, or a task, the sharing is pretty much always the same. You can share with internal groups and users, and you can specify those users here. So if I wanted to share with everybody at Merit, I put in staff and be done with it. If I only wanted to share with netcons, is that there? Where's my netcons? There, which is the group more or less that Kristen belongs to. I could go with that one. So the shares can be created for external users. You can even create external guest users. So somebody not on this email system that you want them to see this calendar, you want them to see this email box, you can actually send it out there and you can password protect it. You can say, I don't want this to be password protected. You can share it publicly without being password protected. But if you go to the internal users or groups, that's when only the group that you want to can see that.
So you don't create it in the address book then, where you have groups within the address book and you send an email to, if I wanted to push diversity inclusion group and just send it to those 20 people.
Yes.
You can build that in the address book,
Yes. You can do that either globally or
where the whole world doesn't see it.
You
or
can
the
do
whole
it either
university.
individually, where the world doesn't see it, or you can do it globally.
All right, I'd like to go to the audience down in Grand Rapids. Do we have any questions down there, Krista?
Just one, as far as I know. Does the Merit Mail play well with the Mac client?
When you say the Mac
The
client,
Mac native?
you mean the mail client?
Yep.
Yeah, so let me go to the document camera and just say yes. So there's my iPad that's set up for my mail, and you can see there that it is completely synced up. The interesting thing about that with Merit Mail is that when you set up the account, so I go over here to Mail and Contacts and Calendars, there's my account there. You'll notice that the account says Exchange on it. As I mentioned earlier, Merit Mail is emulating Exchange back to these as active sync, so that you set up your iPad or your iPhone or your Android simply to look at it, and you click the box Exchange, which is a little counterintuitive. But again, that leverages the active sync protocol, which simplifies that question you had earlier, sir, about how do you get everything? Well, active sync gets everything: contacts, emails, tasks, and so forth. So anybody that can support the active sync does, and the Mac clients are exemplary in supporting the active sync protocol. The only thing I don't personally like...
And is that...
Go ahead.
Is that with the computer as well?
Yeah, the mail application is the same, whether it's Mac OS or iOS. They're both leveraging active sync technology. So there's a view of...
Great, thank you very much.
Pardon me?
That's it.
John, we got a question from Adobe Connect. It was mentioned when a new mail address is created in your address book, it is added as a global address by default. How do you differentiate between personal address book and the global address book?
Within the address book feature itself, once you've created an address book, that's where you go in and determine those shares and determine those features that you want. You know, is this going to be globally shared, which is not the default, by the way. The default is that the address books that you create are not globally shared. As I mentioned, I shared mine just because it's a corporate asset, is the way I see it. You know, everybody can see the contacts that I make. But you can keep those contacts as a separate group. And then when you go to select users from a contact group, you then have to explicitly go to that group and select that set of contacts. But you can create contacts, in short, that are visible only to you.
Time for one last question. Yes.
That's a tricky question. But no, it's a good question because I've sent a number of emails that I'd like to get back in my day. The answer is there's no simple way to do that. We do have a methodology that we strongly advise you not to use because basically what it does is it simply delays sending your email. At the end of the day, the only way to solve that problem is to send your email not directly to the user, but to some holding place while you make up your mind whether to do that or not. So it's a difficult thing to do. On the other hand, you can retract things like shared folders and shared emails and so forth, so that if you accidentally were to share a calendar inadvertently that you didn't want to do, you can go back and say, no, I'm going to revoke that share. There's a way to manage that, and I'll get into that when we come back from our break.
Anybody get a thumbs up from the other end? Yes. All right. Well, why don't you go ahead and finish up the calendaring, and then you can go into the different collaboration tools that are available. Thank you.
All right, it should be back on. So one of the things that happens in calendars is that it pops up a reminder. So I've got my reminders set to come up in a specific sequence. We'll go over that in a minute. But when I get a reminder, I can dismiss it because I'm here already, or I could snooze it for a few minutes. And for me, in my case, they should just mark that button procrastinate. But you can go ahead and say that. And if I had a whole number of invites up here, I could say, or rather alarms up, I could say dismiss all. But I'm going to go ahead and snooze that one, and you'll see it'll come back up in a few minutes. So we're back on calendaring here, and we had created a number of calendar appointments, but we didn't talk in depth about sharing calendars, so I'm going to go back and do that. So I'm going to take one of these sub-calendars here, and I'm going to go ahead and share that. And again, my options with sharing is I can share it for internal users or groups, I can share it with external users, in which case they would view only, or I can share it with the public. So if I'm going to share that calendar, or that email, or that task list, or that briefcase, but in this case it's a calendar, with internal groups, I can put their emails in. So again, I'm going to pick on Kristen again, and put her email in there. And I could list as many users as I wanted here. I could also put in internal email groups. So again, if we had admissions at ferris.edu or merit.edu, we could put that in here. So when I send them internal permissions, or when I generally start with viewer, they can only view. But I could give them a manager of that calendar as well. And of course, this is very useful when you have an administrative assistant who's managing your calendar for you, at least managing it in part. You can delegate to them a manager view in which they could view, edit, add appointments, remove folders to it. They could basically do everything but delete the calendar itself. Admin adds one other power there, which is that they could delete the calendar themselves. This is a great feature, and again, works very well in an example where you have an admin assistant who's managing it. But you have to be careful here because it's very easy for some finger pointing. So somebody says, I know I put that meeting on my calendar. And somebody else says, I didn't touch it, but now it's deleted, and where did it go? So even in those sort of admin-CEO relationships, it becomes difficult if both people can delete or make appointments. So more often what I find, and I know a couple of provosts at Merit Mail universities, what's happened is that the actual owner of the calendar has view permission only. His admin assistant has permission to add appointments and confirm appointments and delete appointments, and he simply follows the calendar blindly like I do. You know, if the calendar says do this, you go do that. But you do have the ability to do those roles within the calendar. And frankly, if you have, in my group, so there's myself as well as 3 others, we have manager view of each other's calendars, and we don't have any conflicts with it at all. It's very helpful when I want to create an appointment that I want to allow you to modify later. So the default is I set up a calendar appointment. You can propose a new time to me, but you can't modify the appointment by adding others in and so forth. So within the group, it's easy for me just to, to have all of our calendars managed, and that way if somebody needs to add a resource and so forth, they don't have to log in as me to do it. They can go in their way. So that's sharing your calendar internally as well as external or internally. Let's go back to sharing it externally now. So externally, I'm going to go ahead and share this with my external email address, which it remembers. And I can assign a password here. What this does is allow you to create a share that can be viewed publicly by people out on the internet, but has a password to protect it. So I'm working on a couple of initiatives in the Detroit area. I'm a passionate cyclist, and we're working on some Rails to Trails work in there, and I belong to a number of groups there. So it's helpful for me to create a calendar that has all of those activities on it, and I share it out with a simple password to that group. You know, it's not high security or anything, but the world can't go hit on that website, and not that there's anything there that I think they would mind. But we do want those documents to be confidential to some extent because they are still in process. And so it's a nice way for me to share that. And again, I can create any password I want here. And then when I send them this and I say OK here, it does 3 things. First of all, it sends them an ICS calendar. And sir, this is back to your thing about sharing external calendars again. So if you're using a Google Calendar, oops, I wasn't going to say that word. If you're using another cloud-based provider's calendaring system, you could take my ICS meeting that I'm sending you here, and you could add that to your cloud calendar so that the calendar that was created here by me that I've shared with you could be viewed in your other email, or rather calendaring account, so long as it supports ICS. It also sends it out as a web page so that I can see what it looks like, or so that if I don't have a calendaring application on my end, I can go ahead and see that as well. Well, there's my reminder. I'm going to snooze that again. So now I'm going to go ahead and create this, but not before copying this. Say OK. So now I'm going to go back to Internet Explorer. And hopefully it's nice to me this time. Let's see, latitude tab. Okay, that's because that calendar is empty. So Internet Explorer and I aren't getting along today. Suffice it to say that they would see all of the calendars as a public calendar, and they would have to log in with their email address and the password that you sign. The email that that person just got, arrowbeach@yahoo.com, included a link to the thing as well as the password for them to log into it. So you can create a public share to be able to see that item. And then lastly, thank you. And then lastly, sorry. I'm asking too much. There we go. Back to the Share Calendar menu to finish it. I could share it publicly, in which case it would not be password protected. So anybody could see this with the URL or the calendar invite that you see down here. So as soon as I send that, this link here, I'm going to try one more time with Internet Explorer. It better be nice to me this time. There you go. So that's the calendar which doesn't have any items on it. So this is what it looks like to a public viewer. Had I selected the external viewer, it would have looked the same, but they would have been required to log in with the password that I assigned. So it enables you to create calendars that you can show to other people. But that's not quite the whole story. Let's move on to the briefcase. So the briefcase are a set of folders, completely separate from your mail account, that come with Merit Mail and are included in your limit or your unlimited storage. So any documents and so forth that you want, you can store in the briefcase. I'm going to go ahead and show you what I created yesterday preparing for this, which was a folder with all of the documents that we prepared for today. So a couple different versions of the PowerPoint, a PDF or two, as well as a technical document. And then located in here is a set of subfolders that contain just PDFs. So this folder up here, let me go back one, contains the PowerPoint presentations, and this folder here contains just the PDFs. So to put a file into the briefcase, again, I simply open the browse window, it goes on my computer, finds any files that I have locally that I want to put here, and I'm going to put this tutorial back in. Okay. So now that file is in the briefcase. So I've got these PDFs plus this folder that I just added here. Well, let's look at the briefcase. I'm going to go up to this one here. I'm going to look at its properties. I've already shared it. So I've shared this folder with all of these people that are listed here at Merit. They have already seen this. I could add a new share, and let's say I'm going to send another internal user. I'm going to say KRCU. There it is. And now I've shared this briefcase with Krista. And what that means is that she gets a message in her email that says, Jim Moran has just shared this wonderful folder with you. Would you like to accept? And if she says, okay, I'm going to accept, it looks to her like this notebook here does to me. So my colleague at Merit, who has nothing in his notebook, I'm going to dismiss this guy, it's bothering me. has shared his notebook with me. So he shared me that briefcase, that portion of his briefcase, called his notebook. So I can see anything that he shared in that, and now he can see anything, or Krista can see anything that I've shared here. Now this document actually, I look at its sharing properties. If I go all the way down to the bottom, I've shared it with the public. So that's one of those ones where there's a URL associated with it, where anybody in the world could see that file if they wanted to do that. I created this folder this way because that's where I put the documents that I was going to use on this computer if I couldn't log into my email account. So if everything went south and I couldn't get into my email account here, I was prepared to use these PDF documents to present, and I can see that from any web browser anywhere. So in effect, it becomes a public share that I've set up for people. You'll notice there's the ability here to manage your shares. So one of the critical things that happens with sharing calendars or email folders or anything, briefcases, is once you've shared them, how do you get them back? You put somebody out there and you shared it, you don't want that anymore. So there's two places. You can go to the folder itself and actually then revoke the various things that we have here. So I'm going to say yes. So she gets a message that says, Jim deleted you. I'm going to say I'm going to take staff away as well. So now I'm going to say, but don't send a message to staff. Just forget it. They just don't have it anymore. There you go. So you can manage those shares and just not create them. So again, I'm kind of blending things here. The address book, the calendar, the briefcase, they're all shares. They all get shared the same way, and even email folders get shared the same way. So there's this single collaboration interface that you use across the various sub-applications within the organization. But let's do a little more on briefcase. So let's say that I'd like to let's go to another briefcase here. Let's see. I'd like to edit this PowerPoint folder that I have here. I'll make sure I get the right one. I want to edit that, but I want to take it out of the briefcase. I've shared that briefcase with other people at Merit, and what if I take it out of the briefcase and I edit it and they do the same thing, and then we both go to put our edited copy back in? Well, that's going to create a lot of confusion. So Merit Mail Collaboration Suite allows you to check out the file. And that's a sign that anybody else who goes to work in that briefcase says that file is checked out. That's not available to me to work on. Furthermore, they could see that file is checked out and Jim Moran has it. So they could send me an email and say, check that file back in, I want it. But, so now that I've said open it, it's going to open it up with the standard interface that's available on the computer. Let's make one quick change here, just so we have a change. And I say File, and you'll notice I have to say Save, but it's read only. So it's not like you're working with this document directly on your machine. It went up and got it out of the briefcase, and now it's placed it temporarily on your hard drive. And before you can upload it, you have to make a temporary copy of it. So I'm going to say go ahead and save it. And I like to save things on the desktop, so I'll go ahead and save it there. So now I've saved it. Notice the file is checked out. I can go back here and I can say check in the file. So I go back and find it where I put it. I put it out here on the desktop. Didn't I? Oh, there it is. So now I've checked the file, saved the copy that I did locally and checked it back in. Again, it's not as straightforward as it's a simple file menu just going File, Save, because it's not actually a share on your computer, not yet anyway. It's out there in the briefcase. So you actually have to go through this check-in, check-out process rather than just do the typical save. So with the briefcase, you'll notice that in addition to checking it in and out, that it has 1 and 2 here. So there's one document, but it actually keeps revision, version rather, of all the documents. So here's how it existed originally. Here's the version after I saved it. And it also says who saved it. If one of the people I had shared it with had changed it, their name would show here. So it gives you the ability to show who's working with the documents in the shared briefcase and who made what changes when. And that can work with any application, whether it's Word or Excel or PowerPoint, or if you have an ability to edit PDFs, any document that you could work with in your local desktop environment using your local software, you can work and save in the briefcase. You can do checking in and checking out, version control, and so forth. So it gives you the ability to leverage, for example, Microsoft. I'm assuming, I might be wrong about this assumption, Microsoft Word is the most common application for word processing here? Right, so it leverages the ability that you already have to work in Microsoft. Now at the same time, in addition to the ability to be able to save existing documents from your PC or your workstation into and out of the briefcase, you can create documents themselves. So we're located within the Merit Mail Collaboration Suite briefcase piece, there is a basic application editor. So this is fundamentally a word processor, and it supports some generic word processing features. So for example, I can do a lot of things with the text size. I can bold it or italicize it or underline it. I can indent. I can add bullets. I can do strike through. I can change the color of the fonts. I could add a table, a brief table. I could insert an image remotely. So, sort of a low-level Microsoft Word if you want. In fact, the technical explanation here is that it supports a format that many of you have probably seen called RTF, Rich Text Format, that contains these basic word processing-like features. And the nice part about that is that you can save these documents and then export them as text that is easily understandable by Microsoft Word or any other word, or rather a word processing application that supports RTF. You can also add attached files and embedded objects here. So if you're working on a Word document, I've done this a couple times, I go into the word processor here and I type up a brief explanation of, let's say it's a drawing that I did in Visio, and then I attach the Visio drawing here. So that the document has the embedded Visio document, and anybody who has Visio on their computer can double click on that within that, and it opens up the application and so forth. So it's a very basic word processor. It does not include at this point a spreadsheet, although I understand that that's on the roadmap, as well as a couple other things. We did this for one large K-12 organization. We did Merit Mail, and they decided to focus on this, not least of all because, I won't get into it, but they didn't have adequate Microsoft Word facilities. So after they had implemented this for their large population, basic word processing every day was being done in the briefcase here. And I got back to the guy about 8 weeks, 9 weeks into it, and I said, "How is it?" And he said, "We found that it serves 98% of our word processing needs. That in fact, I've got people telling me that they're so glad to be done with Microsoft Word because there were so many buttons and knobs and arrows that they didn't understand within Word, that for most ordinary word processing activities that this was pretty good." You can take the text from here directly, paste it or import it into Microsoft Word. So if you started working in a document here and then it got complex to where you wanted Word, you could easily drag that text back into there. That's that one organization, but I have to tell you that that is not the majority experience. The majority of our organizations continue, rather than using cloud-based document management tools, they continue to use Microsoft Word or other local word processors. And I suspect that'll change as things move on. So I'm going to go ahead and save and close, and it says, wait a minute, it must have a name. So I'm going to say this is test. Probably got a couple of those. Oops. And I can add notes in it. So as I indicated, it's already keeping versions of the thing for you. So I can add notes here and say that, whoops, you have to type correctly here. There you go. Whoops. Say OK. So now that document is saved, and it will appear within the briefcase as test right there. So I could just double click it and open it up again. It opens up the document itself. I can elect to edit that, or I can just close it out, which is what I'm going to do. So again, it allows you to do basic document word processing within the briefcase interface. I think more importantly is the ability to work not just with the documents that it can create, but with all of the different file types that we've looked at here today, including the PowerPoint and the PDF. So that would be your briefcase, and again, very similar to the way that you share with the calendar or the inbox. A couple more things, and then we'll go back to preferences. Tasks. Tasks are pretty much the same sort of thing. Whoops, here's some meetings that I'm missing at Merit today, so I'm going to go ahead and dismiss both of those. And what you folks didn't see is that those two reminders came up simultaneously on my iPhone. So I've synced my iPhone with my Merit Mail account. So while I'm working on the interface here, those two appointment reminders came up. They also came up on my phone. Had I been out in the car or whatever, I still would have had my calendar reminders. So kind of a nice feature. But tasks are pretty straightforward. You can create a task. I do this mostly for myself, a reminder that something needs to get done by other times. So I would create a task like, hang on. There we go. So this one we're going to call clean the car. And I can put a status on it. It's in progress. It's not started. I can also assign percentages, which is percentage of completion. And I can put a start date in there when I want that task to start. But most importantly, I can put the end date, right? That's when it needs to get done. And I'm going to say, send me a reminder. And configure that to Jim Moran. I'm going to say save, cannot say, oops, it's past 10:30, so I have to say 11, say save. Oh, invalid date, sorry. There we go. So now I've saved that task. You'll notice I jump back to my email thing. The first thing it's done to me is said, oh, I haven't changed it yet. Excuse me. Sorry, gotta go back to the task. So I'm going to go back into the task, clean the car. And I'm going to say, let's change that to completed. And let's say save. So now at 11 o'clock, which we may not be here for, it'll actually send me a reminder and say that that task has been completed. But let's go back to the taskbar. And just like anything else, you can add attachments to it. So I could add a folder, go back to documents, put that one there. This is part of the task that you have to do. There you go. So now the attachment is with it as well. So we've done the mail, the address book, calendars, tasks, briefcase. Oops. These are some appointments that we needed to close. There we go. One other tab down here, and this is to your point again, sir, back the social networking stuff. So we've taken a number of the popular social networking things. So something called Dig, which I'm not familiar with. Twitter, of course, and then Facebook is in here as well. But basically at this point you can configure your Facebook account, your Twitter account, or what have you, to feed into these things with updates. So for example, if I'd had my Facebook account here, when I clicked on social, it would have showed my page. I could have double-clicked and loaded to it immediately. You can also set the notifications that come up out of Facebook or Twitter to pop up as notifications into Merit. Any of these features, whether it's integration of the social media things or anything else, is done through something we call Zimlets. Zimlets are pieces of code that get embedded into Merit Mail that allow you to point at anything that can offer itself as a web service. So for example, many of you may have used the FedEx or the UPS package tracking thing. And in fact, like if you're like me, you've used it obsessively, right? Every 5 minutes you're checking, where's the package? Where is it? I want that thing delivered now. How many people have used the UPS or the FedEx? No? Okay, some. So I'm not talking to you. So what you can do now with a Zimlet, with a FedEx Zimlet, is that the email message that you originally got when you submitted the delivery will contain the package ID or the tracking ID. With the Zimlet enabled, when you hover over that ID, it would show you the web page. It would bring a pop-up and show you the web page with the current information. Likewise, street addresses can be fed into Google Maps or Yahoo Maps, so that again, when you hover over somebody's addresses, it brings a pop-up window and shows you that. Now, Zimlets can be done personally or they can be done globally. Here are the ones that are currently available for me in my Merit Mail account. Again, we could work with any number of Zimlets. There's a variety of them, and as we work with the IT team at organizations to implement Merit Mail, we identify those Zimlets that are most wanted by their users. We make them available, and then you can elect to have them used or not. I turned the Yahoo Maps one off on my own, quite frankly, because I got tired of every time I just happened to brush by an address, it popped up this map. But other folks, would continue to want that functionality. So we can do almost anything via these Zimlets. That's how we achieve the social Zimlet that you see here. Is through the Zimlet. Let's go back here to calendar, because there's one thing I didn't show you that I want to go to here. Now, Merit has a service, and I'm not pushing that here, just letting you know. We have a service that's sort of like WebEx called Web Connect. And with Web Connect, anybody who uses Merit Mail and anybody whose organization wants them to use Web Connect, they can create a calendar appointment, and I'll create one real quick here. Oops. Go to my friend Arrow Beach again. Oops, wrong name. Sorry. There he is. So now I've created this calendar appointment, and rather than specify a location, I want to make it a Merit Web Connect conference. So we've inserted this Zimlet into the Merit Mail, and again, organizations see this or not depending on what the IT organization wants to do. Now obviously this is my service, so I see it. And now I can go ahead and book a web conference, and I'll do that quickly here. Say okay. And now, in addition to inviting my invitee to the thing, it's actually created a WebEx-like conference, inserted all of the detail down here in this area where you can see me scrolling through about how to connect to it, and invited it as a participant. So not only can you do that with Merit Web Connect, which I'm demonstrating here, but there's an app for WebEx, there's an app for Adobe Connect, and so forth. So the Zimlets that we install would enable Ferris users to use what they know. And I think, as I understand it, you're more of an Adobe Connect shop, so you'd probably want to use that Zimlet and then try to see if we could integrate that in with the Adobe Connect services that Ferris has. But that's an example of how through the Zimlets we can offer end users and organizations a lot of customization. Last item, and then we'll take it up for questions again. How do I manage all of this? So I've got all of these things I can do with Merit Mail. How do I manage my individual preferences for those? So these are pretty familiar to you from your existing account specifications, but just real quick to run through these. You can change your password. We can force you to change your password too, based on various security events and so forth, but you could change your own right here. I'm not going to do that. You can elect which interface you want to have. You can elect your color schemes. And unlike those other organizations, I am allowed to change my color scheme, but I'm not going to. You can change the font size that I see, the number of items that I see in a scrolling thing. You can change how you compose email. You'll notice I'm old school, so I'm composing as plain text, but I think most people today would prefer to do HTML, so you can embed graphics and so forth in your email. This is set to automatically save drafts and a variety of other features that you can see here. When you reply, how do you reply? Do you include the original message in the reply? Do you include the original message as an attachment? Do you include it and do you add characters, the prefix character before it? What does your signature look like? And this is my Merit signature circa 1999 when we were using Pine, right? Because it's that text-based thing that goes on there. You can have multiple accounts. And this is very useful for organizations where you might have a department that you work in and you need to send mail from that department address as well. So at Merit my team works from a group called the Services Mailbox, And basically, I prefer most of the mail gets sent there rather than me personally, because I might miss an email, but the team might not. So when I can send both as Jim Moran, or I can send as Merit Services. And if I send as Merit Services here, I actually have to change this email address here. And it should be Merit Services. So you can see that the email address is sent on the reply to reply to services-info. So I have those two different accounts that I can use to send email, and then it helps direct mail back to me. This next feature we could spend a day talking about, which is to say filters for your email. I'm not a big filter user, as I showed you earlier. I'm a big Save Search user, but many people want to have that filtering thing in. So if a message comes in from, user X that you know, then you can say, always send those messages to this folder. My daughter sings in a choir, a very active choir group that is constantly sending email. They must send 5, 6, 7 emails per day. And I don't want to see those during the course of my workday, but I do want to look at them in case there's somewhere I have to pick her up or some fee I need to pay or what have you. So I've created a rule here that says take all mail that comes from parents at gpchoir.org, which is our group there. And right now I have it discarding because over the holidays the mail was intense and my daughter was out of the country anyway, so it didn't quite matter. But when she comes back on the 7th or the 8th, rather, it's tomorrow, I'll take this one and I'll create a better rule with it. So I'll say file into a folder, and then I can go here and I can browse to the folder that I want to file it into. And there is a choir folder here someplace within I'll just put it in this one that I just created there. So now all the mail that comes from this email address will go into this folder. Likewise, this one here, if it comes from the VMware team, it goes into a file folder called VMware that I've had. But you can make this much, much more complicated. I can say, if it does this, do that, and if the subject contains license, well, that's a particular kind of request, and I want that one to go into, let's see, let's put it into a different folder here. Let's put it in that folder. So now I've created a rule about how to filter email. If it comes from this organization with this subject, if it has this in the content, and so forth. And I can go ahead and create rules ad nauseum, and you can see some of the criteria that you can use for the rules that you have. So all these filters, and some folks use these actually to do spam filters, because they know that this message that they keep getting from this organization or this person, they don't like that anymore. And they're not seeing it as spam, so they'll go ahead here and mark this out. You don't need to do that with Merit and the Cisco Iron Port filtering. You shouldn't have to see that anymore, but as I said, some people do. Quick word on Outlook. Those of you who are Outlook users or any client user, you can set your own filters here as well. But remember that the Merit Mail filters would be processed first rather than the Outlook filter. So this all happens at the server level. What happens on Outlook or any other client filter happens at the local level. There's a bunch of other features that we could talk about here in terms of how your address book looks. This has to do with what happens with frequently emailed contacts and so forth, a little of those things we talked about. Sharing, this is where you can see every single share that you've extended or accepted. So here's all the ones that Jim Moran has accepted, and you can see they're manifold. And then here's all the folders that I've shared in my briefcase. And again, many, 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 many of these. And I'm not currently sharing any mail folders, but if I were, you would see those there as well. And again, I can look at each of these calendars and I can do various things. In this case, I'm going to revoke this share and I'm not going to send the message. So again, it doesn't matter how you've shared it, whether you've shared it as a briefcase, a calendar, a folder, or any other one of the items, the sharing pretty much works all of the same there. Last item, mobile devices.
Thank you. That's one I thought we were missing. Okay.
So, easily supports iPad, which we already looked at. There's my calendar reminders that we saw coming out of my iPad. Oops. Let me zoom out a little bit here. Sorry. Is that better? So you can see that the mail works pretty much the same way that it does in there. There's that message we originally started with this morning, Karen Michon sending me the message about the agenda item. I can see it here, in here. And again, for whoever asked earlier about the mail client, looks pretty straightforward. I'm going to reply all and so forth. Cancel out of there. Go back here. It also completely synchronizes, as I mentioned earlier, your contacts. I just have to find mine. There we go. Anything new that was sent to me is also there on my iPad. And as I mentioned earlier, it's all set up by setting up my mail and contacts and calendar here and simply creating an account. And again, counterintuitively, I create an Exchange account. And in this case, I've said sync my mail, my contacts, my calendars, my reminders, all of which are very helpful. If I didn't want to see my contacts here, though, I could sync that off and say delete. So now my contacts aren't synced on that device. Not any different here with the iPhone, only it's smaller, right? Same basic interface. You'll notice that I have a PIN code on my iPhone. I went to a security summit a while ago and they convinced me that I needed to do that because I could lose my phone. And because of the ability to sync so easily with the phone, all of my corporate and private data could just be gathered by somebody. So I've set my phone up so that I have to enter a PIN code to wake it up unless I have used it in the last 5 minutes. It's a little bit of a pain sometimes, you got to come out and get the PIN code, but it really does secure your iPhone. But again, you'll notice the interface is the same. And it's so breathtakingly simple. You just simply point it at mail.merit.edu, put your username and password in, sync, and it just happens. Likewise with the Android client, I brought with me a single Android client, which is of all things a Nook, and the Nook has a mail client on it, and I did the same thing. I set it up as an Exchange client and pointed to it, and I won't show it to you, but you can see if you want to use your email client on your Nook, you can do that as well. But I use it not to show about this, but any Android device, so any phone that you'd have that would be Androidable, you could see here. Back to this real quick though, and then we'll wrap up. You'll notice that all of these devices, they appear here in a place where I can manage them. So let's say, for example, that I did lose my iPhone. I could wipe it from here. I could say, whoever's got that iPhone, I don't want them to see my email. And it would take all of the email off of the iPhone and get rid of it. I could suspend the sync, it wouldn't see any new email. I can create policies to provision it. Let's see, let's go to the iPhone. Oops. Sorry. At this point, I'm only allowed to suspend and resume sync, but there are additional things that you can do here, and if I had permission, you could wipe it. Maybe my demo account must have that. But we found this to be very helpful for people who are concerned about their personal security. IT departments, when they allow you to use your personal phones like this to sync with your email accounts, the line between IT assets and personal institutional assets gets a little bit fuzzy. So with this interface, it allows you to at least control how you sync with these devices. I think we've done everything, John, haven't we? Thank you, chat. Last time. So chat is not currently supported in Merit Mail. If we were to implement Ferris, we would implement them on Zimbra 8. What we've seen here today is 7. We don't know a lot about 8, but we do know that it will include a chat service. 5 and 6 did, and then they took it out for 7 because I think they wanted to develop this new one. And we haven't seen it yet, but if it works like the old one does, it integrates completely with your contacts and your directory. So anybody who's within your organization, you can use the chat service within there as well. The log on to your Merit Mail web interface includes a log on to the embedded chat client. If you're working with Outlook or a third-party client for email and contacts and calendaring, then you'd have to install a third-party Outlook or third-party chat client on your machine. But again, it would integrate with the Merit Mail chat client that we have. I think it's time to open it up to questions.
All right, we'll start here in this room. Start right up front.
On your calendars, you showed several sub-calendars. Are those full in your main calendar, or can they be made visible in your main calendar? Appointment in a sub-calendar, does it block out time in your primary calendar?
Yes. So I'll address those issues one at a time. So this appointment that we did here, well, let's do this one. I'm going to go ahead and put that on another calendar. And again, you'll have to forgive me because I'm kind of colorblind here. But now when I highlight it, we're getting there. It now appears on the calendar. But in my color blindness, I haven't made it any different than the other calendar. And some people might not like that, so you could go here and edit the properties of it and say, well, that particular calendar, I want to see that in green. And now those appointments then would be in green, but they're only going to show when you've selected the calendars to view here. So currently,
Do any mix and match whatever combination you want.
so yeah, so currently I'm showing my calendar as well as a couple of my sub-calendars, but more importantly, it's everybody else's calendar that I want to see. So here's my boss, Leslie. He's the person whose calendar I want to look at the most. But she's got so many meetings that,
Yeah.
you know, by the time it fills up here, we're all going to get a little scared. Hold on. I don't know what's taking it so long. There we go. And it becomes a little unreadable, and that's often when I will go to the single day view when I want to get that kind of granularity to see what those things are. So again, you can mix and match those any way that you want to have happen, but all of that happens over here when you actually select which calendars you want to see visible.
Okay, next question, Vicki?
I have a couple. First of all, when you did the tasks, can you take, and I might have missed it, can you take an email and add it to your task list? Because in most cases, my task is coming from an email.
So if we go over here to email, I don't know if this works or not, but we're going to find out. I thought it did. Sorry. I think I have to drag it to an existing task is my problem. So I'll have to get back into it. Second question?
We talked, when you signed in as your name at Merit Mail. And then you also talked about your password. You did mention eDirectory, Active Directory. Is there a way that we can hook so that they have to use their Active Directory account and cannot change it? And they don't have to put the @ferris.edu at the end? Or because it's in the cloud, will we have to put the @ferris.edu?
Yes to the first two parts of that question. You don't have to put the @ in. You will get your own login proxy. So again, it'd probably be something like mail.ferris.edu. So long as you go to that login proxy, you can put in just your username because your username will be unique among that group. And we prefer that organizations link to their directory service. 98% of our Merit Mail implementations, we're actually linking to their directory service. So when you log in, what you don't see under the covers, so to speak, is that we actually send a request to Ferris's directory server and say, is this the correct password, yes or no, and other attributes about that user. And then that server responds back to us and we log you in. So let's say that you forgot your password or lost it or whatever, and you call the help desk, they change your password. It should be changed for Merit Mail then as well, because we're always just asking Ferris for those credentials.
Because we are in the middle of this conversion from eDirectory to Active Directory, and you are web-based, do you use CAS authentication also?
Yes.
Additional questions? Okay, go ahead. Yes.
Would you go back to your
Let's get there.
do the week
Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. This here? Yeah, to make it and that's not what it is. Those are just two separate appointments. It just shows my own work style there. To make it transparent, you can put it as tentative. I know that's not exactly what you wanted to hear, but that's sort of the answer. I guess not. Not in this case. It's just taking a while. So that will change the way it displays, but it's not meant to be that. There. See how it went a little transparent at that point? But there are all-day appointments too, right here. I'm not a fan of those because very often folks, when they're scheduling appointments, they don't necessarily look. The all-day is at the top, and they'll go ahead and schedule something even though I've gone out of the office. And if they looked at my status as they're making the appointment, they would see I was busy. It would show that, but it's not immediately apparent. So at Merit, organizationally, we've made a policy not to use the all-day appointment and to actually block out the whole day. Yes. Yeah, but they would be free. So it's an odd kind of thing, but you'd have to actually create a free thing. It wouldn't block your busy. You can then keep that. I would recommend that if that was your goal, that you would create a separate personal calendar. That's what most folks do. And then when they create the appointment, then they put it here on the personal calendar. That way it at least blocks the time out on your regular calendar without letting other people see it.
I don't think that's what she's aiming at. I think she's aiming at just having a reminder on that day that these things need to be done. You know, they're not time-based.
I see.
We do that a lot in Lotus Notes, where people will set up, 2 or 3 things at the top that show these are the things you need to take care of today, but they are not set up to happen at a particular time.
Thank you for the clarification. That was very helpful. I think that functionality then to completely shift tasks would be something that then would best be done in the task list, where you could create tasks for yourselves, and then the reminders for tasks can be customized to remind you at a given time. You could say always do it at 8 o'clock, or you could, for each individual task, you could have it out that way.
Is
there a provision for electronic time on calendar system that could interface with payroll?
We've had some initial looks at some of those things, but currently we have nothing in the works that would do that. Now, Merit Mail itself, just like the Zimlets that we saw, is web presentable. So we can make data from Merit Mail be available as a web service to any third-party app. There is an API that comes with Merit Mail for those sort of things, but with regard to a time-off busy calendar, we have not done any integrations with those. Merit itself is, as you may know, we're hosted by the University of Michigan, who has their own free busy calendar that we use, and that's going to be our first target to see if we can integrate that. But at this time, we don't have that, and it'll probably be a year before we had any definitive word. Oh, I sure do. In fact, if you're interested, if you're still previewing systems, Kristen or I could show you our personal time off system that we use at the U of M and our personal account, and it's very nice. The GUI, there's a couple issues with the GUI, but in terms of the ease of it, I spend about 30 seconds a month now scheduling time off, where it used to be this horrendous activity with lots of paper involved. But yeah, getting that into the calendar is a goal, but nothing in the near future.
Additional questions? Go ahead.
currently on my mobile device, I cannot see my boss's calendar. Can you with this system?
Yes, that person would have to add the share on your, allow you to see that calendar, which I'm assuming would be okay, right? And then here I have to log into my phone. By the way, this PIN code thing is really annoying when you want to use the Maps feature when you're driving, just in case you want to know.
You have to go to the document camera.
Okay, thank you, John.
You're welcome.
So within the within the calendar itself now, you'll see that I have an option, or maybe you don't see. Let me zoom a little bit. Oh boy, that was showing a lot better earlier. But you'll see there I can select calendars. And at that point, that's where you would explicitly add that person's calendar. They would have shared it with you. You would have had the email message. So you can see the same calendars that I had earlier are visible here. And I can say, okay, I want to see that EDUCAUSE calendar as well. There it is. And now that would display. Does that answer your question?
Time for one more question in this room, and then we'll go to Grand Rapids. Anyone? Steve? Okay.
Earlier, you said you were at CMU, EMU, Western Michigan, Wayne State, and a few others. How long have you been at those institutions?
Wayne State University was one of our charter customers, so they've been on Merit Mail for over 3.5, 4 years now. Western Michigan University, Kristen? 2.5 years, we're coming up on that one. And then Eastern Michigan University, I think they're on their second, 4 years for them, right?
Do you know if any of them are going to go out and try and find another vendor?
Probably not. First of all, we do a pretty darn good job, of course, that's the way I see it. But secondly, migrating email is not trivial. So when we do this initially for organizations, Merit exerts, as well as the organization, exerts a lot of effort to migrate the email out. And so just, after a contract is up or annual renewal or something like that, it would be a tremendous amount of work to choose another vendor. Now, again, I like to think that it's because we did such a great job that they want to continue. But I have to, in all honesty, say that no one wants to migrate email more than once. And so long as we continue to do the job that we can do for them, those organizations will continue to stay with us. What's interesting is there was a lot of, sorry, I'm getting into salesy mode here, but there was a lot of hue and cry about outsourcing email at all these organizations. It was a big one. But when you talk to them now, there's no regrets. They don't even think about it. If you ask them, would you consider going back to doing it in-house or going to another provider? The answer is almost uniformly no. Go ahead, Kristen.
I just wanted to say, in the interest of full disclosure, Central Michigan is moving. We had their students on Merit Mail. They are moving to a Microsoft offering, I believe. I'm not entirely sure which offering they're going to, but I just didn't want you to hear absolutely not, and then find out about Central's move. So,
Kristen is the account manager for the members, so a little more in touch with than I am. Sorry about that.
Did you experience any problems when you went into places replicating the current contacts, emails, folders?
Well, yeah, it's fair to say the answer to that, of course, is yes. But more important is to focus on the fact that we were able to solve all of those issues. Our IT team has made a specialty of migrating, right? We've done so many of these. Every time we do one, we learn more. And as I think I referred earlier here, calendaring is particularly difficult to migrate. Folders can be difficult. There's different applications can be difficult. But we've really developed a great process for doing that. So that I would suspect that if we did this here at Ferris, the only real difficulty that we might be experiencing would be with ongoing meetings. I've looked into this just a little bit in anticipation of this meeting, and the way that that Lotus keeps its ongoing meetings is a format that is very similar to what we went from, which was Meeting Maker. Does anybody remember Meeting Maker? Another app. And we had difficulty with ongoing meetings. But if you'd asked me that question 3.5 years ago, I couldn't have answered as positively as I have today. We've done so many of these migrations, it's safe to say we've seen all the problems. Now, I have to knock on wood when I say that because I'm sure there are challenges here that would be new to us. But we've done a great job. At Western, we migrated, I want to say 9 different group-wise systems into one, and group-wise is like, like Latin. It's a dead language. And so it was quite a challenge, but we did a great job, and they now have a single unified mail system.
All right, let's go to Grand Rapids and see if there's some questions down there, and then we'll go to the online.
I was wondering, does this offer an out-of-office feature?
Yes, that was contained in the preferences feature. So when we were in the preferences here, I'll go back quickly. There's my task that finally popped up. So I'll go all the way back up to the top here, oops, to preferences. This is part of the auto reply feature. So you can send auto reply in response to a whole bunch of things, different types of emails and so forth. We didn't get into that. But the most common one is an auto reply to your out of office message, which is what we're showing here. So basically I've said send an auto reply message to all mail that come in. This is what I set up when I was gone on the Christmas holiday. I'll be out of the office, etc. It says when to start and when to stop. It stops on midnight of that day. So on the 3rd, I was back in the office and nobody was receiving an auto reply. By the way, to the person who asked about the return receipt, here's where you can do the return receipting here. I never asked for it. Other questions?
Any additional questions in Grand Rapids?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, we have one online question. You're all set? All right, well, then I'd like to thank our visitors from Merit, Jim and Kristen. Did a great job in presenting. I want to remind you that there's a link at the bottom of your handout that we've given you. You can go online and fill out the survey. It's probably going to take you 10 minutes, maybe 15 to fill out that survey. We really appreciate it. And I also want to say, please pass the word on to your peers that these sessions are happening. Walk-in is welcome, and you don't have to come. They don't have to come to every presentation, but we certainly would appreciate them participating where they can. So please pass that on. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.